Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, our mission is really to cut through all the noise,
Yeah,
and deliver the core insights from the research you've shared with us.
exactly.
We're taking a deep look at a topic often surrounded by silence, maybe even stigma, the psychological impacts of self-pleasure.
hmm And it's an area where, personal stories often clash with what clinical observation shows.
Right.
What's really valuable about the sources we're looking at today is they kind of bypass the moral arguments entirely.
Okay.
They focus just on the quantifiable behavioral outcomes. So we're here to analyze the research mapping out specific feelings, which can range from really positive to, well, intensely negative, tied to this practice.
Okay, let's unpack that right away then,
Yeah.
because the research seems to have a very clear central finding here.
It does.
The psychological outcome, it's not like a universal thing. It's actually highly variable. And it seems to all come down to just one factor, the degree of practice, how
Yeah.
much.
That's absolutely the critical distinction, and it's a very pragmatic one. The sources, they draw a really bright line between moderation and excess. If this behavior is practiced in moderation, the research pretty overwhelmingly points towards positive results. We're talking relaxation, better mood, heightened self-awareness, things like that.
Okay.
But once someone crosses into that territory of excess, the whole psychological profile flips. It brings in negative feelings like anxiety, crushing guilt, even potential depressive symptoms.
That sets the stage perfectly.
Yeah.
So if the degree is the deciding factor, we really have to start with the heavier side of that scale.
Makes sense.
What are the specific psychological risks the source material links with excessive practice? Because the list, it looks quite extensive. And interestingly, much of it seems rooted in something kind of external to the act itself.
That's exactly what's fascinating. The first, and maybe the most pervasive negative impact noted, is the emergence of intense guilt. And then anxiety follows.
Guilt and anxiety.
Yeah. The research strongly suggests that for a lot of people, this guilt isn't actually generated by the act physiologically. It comes from external things, like cultural or religious beliefs about it.
Ah.
And these beliefs can be really deeply ingrained.
So it's like a cognitive conflict then. You're doing something that your own internal belief system, which society helps shape, is telling you is wrong or maybe shameful.
Precisely.
How does that tension show up, practically speaking, as anxiety?
Well, it creates this enormous cognitive load. The anxiety stems from the secrecy, the shame, the constant sort of internal battle between desire and what you feel is morally right or wrong.
Right.
And the research notes this isn't just fleeting guilt after the fact. It often leads to continuous, ongoing anxiety that follows the person around. It becomes a chronic stressor.
Wow. Okay. That continuous anxiety, it sounds like fertile ground for something maybe even worse. Something the sources actually label as compulsive behavior, maybe even potential addiction. When does a regular habit cross that line into compulsion?
So the sources tend to define that transition based on losing control and the negative life consequences that result.
Loss of control.
Yeah. When the practice becomes excessive, the person isn't really using it for temporary relief anymore. They become dependent on it just to cope, even when negative outcomes are piling up.
Okay.
It shifts, from being maybe a self-soothing act to a genuinely compulsive behavior. And the research is pretty stark here. This level often requires intervention, treatment even, to mitigate the severe negative impacts on life. It suggests a significant disruption to just day-to-day functioning.
So it stops being a choice, really, and starts feeling like a demand.
That's a good way to put it.
When you look at that combination, guilt, anxiety, compulsion, it becomes, less surprising that the sources also connect excessive practice to deeper issues like depression.
Absolutely. The research suggests that cycle.
Yeah.
Feeling guilty, trying to stop, failing, then succumbing to the compulsion again.
Yeah.
It creates this profound feeling of helplessness. This self-defeating pattern seems to directly contribute to either the onset or the worsening of depression symptoms and just general tension. It's the cumulative weight, really, of feeling like you can't regulate yourself. That weighs heavily on the psyche.
And as if that emotional drain wasn't enough, the source material brings up something incredibly practical, something maybe we can all relate to on some level: the energy cost.
Ah, yes.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, because it moves the impact from the purely emotional into, genuine physical and mental performance drain.
Yes, the research definitely highlights the impact of excessive energy consumption. We often forget that repeated high-intensity emotional and physical investment, it draws heavily on the body's reserves.
Right.
And this leads to generalized fatigue, persistent drowsiness, and critically, a distinct difficulty concentrating on daily tasks.
Okay, I think we need to pause on that difficulty concentrating for a second, because that feels like a
Right.
really key practical takeaway for anyone listening.
It is.
What does the research imply about that loss of focus? Like, what does it look like?
Well, think about the cognitive resources you need just to function day to day, right? To follow a complex meeting or write an important email, manage household stuff.
Sure.
When those resources are depleted by, well, excessive activity and also the accompanying mental noise of guilt and anxiety, the first thing to suffer is often executive function.
Okay.
The sources suggest that this excessive expenditure means you might literally be sitting at your desk or in class, and you just can't connect the dots. You're struggling to sustain attention because your mental bandwidth has been chronically diminished.
Wow, that's a really practical, almost unmistakable sign that a private behavior is starting to leak into your public performance, your responsibilities.
Precisely. And there's one final major consequence noted in this sort of negative spectrum: social fallout.
Social fallout.
Yeah, the research identifies a pattern of social isolation. It finds that individuals engaging in excessive practice might start to actually prefer solitude. They withdraw, sometimes significantly, from engaging in social activities.
But why? Why does that withdrawal happen? Is it just the shame aspect, or is there maybe a functional reason tied to that energy drain we just talked about?
It seems to be both, actually, creating that kind of vicious cycle we mentioned earlier.
Right.
The shame definitely drives the secrecy and the reluctance to engage socially. But the fatigue also reduces the mental energy you need for social interaction, which can be demanding, right?
Yeah, it really can.
So the individual might start to prefer the low-effort isolation that allows them to maintain the habit, which in turn severely limits their chances for positive external connection and validation. And ultimately, that spirals down, negatively impacting overall mental health.
Okay, that's a really comprehensive and frankly quite sobering analysis of the pitfalls of excess.
It is.
So now let's completely flip the discussion. Let's look at the research that addresses moderation. Because when this practice is done within, let's say, reasonable bounds, the psychological benefits appear to be, well, overwhelmingly positive, according to these sources.
That's right.
What's the immediate, maybe most common positive outcome that the sources point to?
Well, the foundation of the positive side seems to be stress relief and relaxation.
Okay.
Moderate practice can serve as a really temporary but effective release valve. The research confirms that engaging in the behavior can, temporarily alleviate tension, diffuse immediate anxiety. It acts as a pretty healthy form of physical and emotional decompression sometimes.
So it's not just distracting you from the stress, it might actually be helping resolve some of that physiological buildup of tension.
Exactly. And then following that physical release, the mood benefit often appears. Absolutely. The sources confirm that moderation can significantly improve one's immediate affective state, their mood. By providing that relief and fostering some momentary comfort, it's noted that individuals often experience genuine feelings of, happiness and general relaxation. It's a measurable, short-term boost to well-being that crucially doesn't seem to trigger that cascading guilt we discussed with excess.
Right. The guilt isn't there in moderation. That makes sense for immediate mood, but the sources also point to something maybe a bit deeper, something that improves long-term self-regard. How does a private behavior like this potentially lead to increased self-confidence and even self-esteem?
Yeah, that is a really powerful finding, actually, because it speaks to acceptance. For some people, moderate self-pleasure is linked to an increase in self-confidence because it allows for private internal validation, a kind of non-judgmental acceptance of one's own body and sexual needs.
Oh,
It
okay.
can become an act of self-appreciation, sort of fostering comfort and ownership over your own sexuality without needing external affirmation.
So it helps build maybe a healthier internal story about self-worth.
Possibly, yeah.
And perhaps the most fundamentally useful benefit, one that has applications across, well, all sexual experiences, is the dramatic improvement in sexual self-knowledge.
Oh, this is arguably the essential psychological, maybe even clinical benefit. The sources really emphasize that moderate practice is often the most direct and maybe the most honest route to understanding your personal sexual needs. It's foundational knowledge.
Foundational knowledge. How so?
Well, it allows the individual to clearly identify what specifically causes them sexual arousal, what they prefer, what their body responds to physically and emotionally.
And if we connect that self-knowledge back to you, the listener, how does that translate into, like, real-world application? It's not just a fact about yourself, right? It's a tool.
It's a crucial tool, especially for communication,
Yeah.
whether that's just communication with yourself, understanding yourself better, or in the context of a relationship. By having a clearer understanding of your own internal landscape, your desires, your triggers, your boundaries, you're just infinitely better equipped to communicate those needs effectively, which can lead to healthier relationships and minimize potential confusion or frustration down the line.
That's a fantastic way to frame that positive impact. Okay, so what does this all mean when we put the sort of the dual nature of these findings together for our listener? What's the big picture?
I think it means the research provides a very pragmatic framework, a way for self-assessment maybe. The psychological outcome really hinges entirely on that distinction between healthy moderation and destructive excess.
Right.
Moderation delivers tangible benefits, improved mood, powerful stress relief, essential self-knowledge.
And the moment that shifts into excess, what happens then, according to the research?
That's where the practice seems to stop serving the individual and begins to drain them. It introduces those heavy risks we talked about, the intense, often culturally driven guilt, the potential for self-destructive compulsion, and that very real physiological and psychological drain.
The fatigue, the focus issue.
Exactly. The fatigue and that practical difficulty concentrating. The research makes it pretty clear. The behavior itself is fundamentally neutral. The psychological consequence is determined entirely by the degree of engagement and the extent to which it starts to take over other life functions.
That is a very precise synthesis of our sources. The research really shifts the conversation away from a purely moral one, doesn't it?
It does.
It moves it to a much more pragmatic evaluation. Is this behavior enhancing your life, or is the excess detracting from it?
And that leads directly to the final provocative question we wanted to leave you with. It stems directly from those sources on physical performance strain.
Okay.
We discussed how excessive practice can lead to fatigue, and that specific difficulty concentrating on your daily tasks, the inability to focus on that key email or solve a complex problem at work or school.
Right, that cognitive fog.
Exactly. So the question is, if that lack of cognitive focus, that specific mental fatigue, is potentially the first practical indicator that a seemingly private behavior is starting to interfere with your external life responsibilities, how might tracking your own energy levels and concentration become your most reliable personal metric for assessing if moderation has perhaps secretly slipped into excess? It's a real-world functional measure that's available to you right now just by paying attention to your own experience.